Football loves new ideas, novel tactical trends, unusual players, and changes in coaching approach. But what are the ideas going out of fashion? Which tactics are heading for extinction? For a long time, the 4-4-2 formation was the default way of setting a team up, in English football at least. 2 fullbacks, 2 centre-backs, 2 wingers, 2 central midfielders and 2 strikers. Football made simple. In 2009-10, it was still in use by nearly half of the teams in the league. According to Opta, 43.9% of the starting lineups named that year set up in a 4-4-2. That gradually decreased until a sudden drop in 2012-13, going down from 33% the season before to just 12%. In 2023-24, just 6.5% of the starting 11s in the Premier League have been arranged in a 4-4-2. Burnley, Luton Town and Crystal Palace have been responsible for the majority of those, with most other teams opting for a variation on a 4-2-3-1 setup. 76 of the 200 starting lineups named this season, in fact. But of course, the evolution of football tactics is cyclical. Someone comes up with an idea, it gets widely adopted, then others figure out that idea's flaws. And so new ideas are established and old ones are revived. 4-4-2 might not be dead just yet. And of course it remains an often used shape out of possession for many teams, so it certainly can't be described as obsolete. Over the past 10 seasons, there have been 40,715 corners awarded in the Premier League, from which 1,409 goals have been scored. It means that only 3.5% of corners actually result in goals, about 1 in 29. Therefore, managers inevitably look for more effective ways of using corners rather than just crossing into the box. Many top-flight clubs have either a full or part-time set-piece coach, but on a more basic level, this search for efficiency has contributed to the rise of short corners. Over the last decade, the low point of short corners taken in the Premier League was in 2012-13, when just 11.7% of the corners were short. The upward curve hasn't been smooth, but over subsequent seasons it has been rising, to the point where in 23-24, so far, 20.6% of corners have been taken short, up from 17.7% in the previous year. And since the vast majority of corners are still of the traditional variety, we can't really claim that they're dying out. But the numbers are heading towards them being put on the endangered list. So, is the trend resulting in more goals? Well, sort of. In 2013-14, there were 123 goals from 4,094 corners, or 3%. And last season, there were 151 from 3,830, or 3.9%. Which means there has been an increase in goals from corners that roughly tracks with the increase in short corners. But there are a couple of things to take from this. First, 3% to 3.9% is an increase of 30%, which is significant but not momentous. And just because there's been a rise in short corners and a rise in the number of goals from corners doesn't necessarily mean that one has caused the other. It is possible, but equally it could just be that teams are thinking more carefully and working more specifically on what they do with long corners. For what it's worth, 24 of the 151 goals scored after corners last season were from short corners, while this season it's 3 from 29. There is no real correlation between short corners taken and goals scored from them either. Last season, Manchester United took the most with 67, but only scored once, which is exactly the same number of goals as Everton, who took just 9. Teams are shooting from outside the box much less frequently. In 2009-10, 45% of shots in the Premier League were taken from outside the penalty area. That figure has, with the odd minor fluctuation, essentially gone down each year, to the point where last season, 33.2% of shots were taken from long range. This season, we're at 32.6%. Now the reason is obvious. A shot from outside the box is much less likely to result in a goal. Though 45% of total shots in 2009-10 were taken from at least 18 yards out, only 13% of the total goals scored were. Long-range shooting may be spectacular, but it's a pretty inefficient way of trying to score. However, just because teams are taking fewer long shots doesn't necessarily mean fewer goals are being scored from a long way out. In 2009-10, 137 goals were scored from outside the box, a number that's gone up and down over the years from a high of 186 in 2013-14 to a low of 120 in 2020-21. 17.7% and 11.7% of the total goals scored in those seasons. And now it's going back up. The last 2 full seasons saw 143 and 145 scored from outside the box, 13.6% and 13.3% for the total, while this season's ratios stand at 13.2%. Teams are taking far fewer long shots than 14 years ago, but are scoring more goals from them, which suggests that those long shots are being more carefully chosen. There was a time when a goalkeeper's primary option was to smash the ball upfield. Now, teams are encouraging their keepers to be a bit more precise. There are a few ways of measuring this, but the one that we're going with is pass completion. Going back 20 years, the average pass completion rate for a goalkeeper in 2003-04 was 42.5%, but that has gradually risen to the point that this season has seen 71.8% of passes find their mark. Last season it was 67.1%. The season before, 65.8%. Before that, 64.9%, and before that, 60.9%, and so on. Imagine that you could learn everything that you need to know about football news in 10 minutes without having to read anything. Well, that's why we made the Daily Football Briefing Show. It's a new 10-minute podcast that catches you up on all the football news, plus what's on TV that night. Published every weekday, it's the Daily Football Briefing Show. Check the link below to subscribe for free now, wherever you get your podcasts.